Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we will be reviewing the Letty Bermudez Thermal Shock Processed Colombia from September Coffee Co. And there's the bag right there. And September, based out of Ottawa, Ontario. And they're a coffee roaster that's appeared on this channel on numerous occasions, as they have definitely become one of our most featured coffee roasters on this channel. And that's why it was so surprising to me that we had never reviewed September's Letty Bermudez coffee in the past, given that it sounds like such an ideal fit for us. So when I saw them release this coffee, coupled with another couple of coffees that we were interested in purchasing from them, we went ahead and purchased it. And it'll certainly be interesting to see how their version of this coffee turned out, as this right here is day 51. And recipe we went with for this coffee was our higher extraction one at a 17:1 water to coffee ratio, brewed at 99 degrees Celsius, about 210 degrees Fahrenheit. And I like this one best through the V60, which usually indicates a more medium fine grind. However, we went a little bit more fine on that grind as well. Rest profile for this coffee, this one is one of September's standard offerings, as I don't believe that they ever offered this one in an extra light profile. That being said, once again, September still roasts pretty light compared to the vast majority of coffee roasters out there. And this one I feel like is still a bit lighter than some of the other standard offerings that we've had from them in the past. So it's not to that ultra light extent. And it is, I would say, lighter than the experiences we've had from some other coffee roasters that have offered this coffee, like Hydrangea in the past. So this one I would say is on the more light, not necessarily overly light, but still lighter side of things by most standards and metrics. With all that out of the way, let's go ahead and start discussing this coffee. Day 22, first impression. So I should start with this. Usually we will start a standard offering, like a non-extra light offering, around the 2-week mark, but I decided to let this one sit for just an extra week, and it was pretty interesting right from the onset, as it doesn't have that same level of intensity in the aroma that other Letty Bermudez coffees we've had in the past have had, as it didn't translate as much into the cup either, as there's an expectedly peach-forward experience, but it is also slightly toned down relative to other versions of this coffee that we've had. Now, one really important and notable thing that we got right from the onset was that it did have a noticeable placer de viso-like spiced quality to it that does taper off before it settles into a more peach gummy-like experience. So right from the start, there was something slightly hindering and marring this overall experience, and it was going to be interesting to see if that would continue with this one. As on day 25, we opted for the Chemex, and there was notably less of that spiced quality, so I did wonder if maybe it was just from opening this coffee and it maybe needed a little bit of time, or whatever the case was. It was a little less pronounced and prominent this time around, though there was a slightly sweet cracker grain-like taste within the coffee itself. So again, kind of alluded to the fact that this one is still pretty light, as it was presented in the first day as well, but not to the same extent that it was today, as I feel like the Chemex did seem to highlight that specific quality of this coffee. The aroma does still smell like Letty, but it hasn't fully translated into the cup itself, as it does have a very high level of sweetness in the peach gummy sense. However, once again, not to the same extent as some of the other Letty experiences we've had in the past, or even the Finca El Paraíso that we had had from Jimmy Beans earlier this year. Day 28 to the April brewer, and the previously mentioned spiced quality is present in the aroma of the brew itself, with the earlier spiced quality also within the cup this time around as well. A lot of the more peachy Letty qualities have become pronounced as the coffee does cool down, with still a slight bit of that sweeter cracker feel as well. So this coffee is different, I would say, than some of the other Letty Bermudez coffees we've had in the past. Right off brew, I didn't necessarily find the best experience, especially given that it did seem to have that slightly spiced quality. And when I mentioned that spiced quality, a lot of people identify it as being maybe a little bit more of a peppercorn, and that's kind of the way that it was presented within this coffee. And this is where I must highlight and note the very important fact that it is in the aroma of the bag itself. So it's not one of those things where it's maybe a brewing error. It could obviously be a brewing error, but given that it is in the aroma of the whole beans, the grounds, the bloom, and the cup itself, I definitely think that there was something a little bit off by the experience of this coffee. Day 31 through the V60 with some higher extraction adjustments, of course, lower concentration, higher temperatures, more fine grind, and the coffee is better. And there are a lot of takeaways this time around, so the sweeter cracker feel is present again, and I couldn't really shake that. That's another thing that seems to be present in the aroma. When I open up this bag of coffee, those are kind of the two things that I take away outside of the peachiness. The peachiness is obviously abundant, that somewhat artificial peach aroma to it. But outside of that, there is that slightly sweeter cracker. I think it reminds me of saltines when they have a little bit more of that sweetness to it. But it's also pretty abundant right off brew with the spiced quality dissipating over time. It just massively improves on cool down. I think I need this coffee to be at about room temperature for me to really experience much more of those peachy qualities to it, which has been a little bit of an afterthought with this coffee because it's Letty Bermudez. You fully expect it to be very peachy, but these other things that I'm taking away from this coffee are stuff that I felt like was worth highlighting. Day 34. Through the Chemex with the same adjustments, and there are more inconsistencies as the coffee continues to offer that slightly spiced quality to it and more of that strong sweet cracker feel while improving on the cool down, but not to the same extent as previous days. Peachiness slightly diluted, so an okay day this time around. So we decided to just stick with the V60 from this moment. Actually, we have one more Chemex day. I lied. Let's move on. Day 37 through the V60 with our standard recipe, and there are further issues to this coffee as the spiced quality is back yet again, hindering the overall experience to it. There's a slightly less desirable quality that is taking away from the overall peachiness with that sweeter cracker and spiced quality in general, so it still just continues to improve on the cool down. I will say that as far as the layering of this coffee goes, it's just extremely, I want to say, consistent in that sense. You fully know what you're going to expect right from the onset. It has that, I don't want to say undesirable quality, but it is that spiced quality to it, that slightly sweet cracker, and then once it gets to room temperature, it just seems to skyrocket on the peachy experience, which isn't something that I've experienced from other Letty Bermudez coffees, but we will continue to move on and see what happens with this one, as on day 40, we opted for the Chemex with our standard recipe. Still similar issues, as it does have that combination of spiced and slightly sweet cracker feel off brew. A little less so today, peachy otherwise, and again, the peachiness just seems to be an afterthought within this coffee. Day 43, final notes we have through the V60 with some higher extraction adjustments, and the coffee was back to being at its best, as it still is hindered by that spiced quality, and I can't really shake that. It isn't quite as pronounced for whatever reason when we push this coffee with a jasmine, peach, boba milk tea experience and the intense sugary sweetness with it opening up as it does cool down. I feel like that's probably what people that have maybe never had this coffee before really seem to focus and hone in on. And given that we've had a couple of iterations of Letty Bermudez or coffees very similar to it from Diego Bermudez, I think that it's something we came to expect with this coffee going into it. So even though it was presented in a very intense and prominent sense, I was much more focused on the other qualities that were maybe not as prominent within other versions of Letty Bermudez. All right, so let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we're getting. And we have 2 level 5s, so let's go through those real quick. And we'll start with the sweetness, level 5. This is Letty Bermudez. It is an extremely sweet coffee. It's overly sugary, overly sweet, overly peach forward. So level 5, obviously where we're going to put it. And it's one of those coffees, once again, where it could score as high as like a level 6, given just how sugary sweet this one is. So level 5 where we opted to put it. Stone fruit level 5, and a lot of the reason why when it comes to wash processed coffees we have a very hard time putting them at a level 5 for stone fruit, it's because Letty Bermudez does exist. The moment we had Letty Bermudez for the first time, it was always going to be hard for a lot of other coffees to achieve that level 5 mark, as it's up there, level 6, it's just super peach forward. If nobody's ever had this before, the best way a lot of people describe it is maybe like tinned peaches, like peaches right from the can that have that very strong syrupiness to them. Also, I've heard like peach boba tea, which is very much a thing given there's a very strong florality and kind of milk tea sweetness to it. So level 5, definitely prominent within this coffee. Let's go ahead and move on to level 4's finish. Level 4, I do have to say I'm very happy that this coffee isn't overbearing in that sense, as it does have a, we'll say, very even finish. It doesn't last too long to the extent where it just makes this coffee so skewed in one specific direction. It just kind of cuts off on a more even basis. So level 4, happy with that. Acidity level 4, that's an interesting one to me, and as I'm drinking this coffee today, I can see it. It's surprisingly a bit more bright than I would have expected. I don't think other iterations of this coffee have been quite as bright and acidic as this one, but this is also still a little lighter in general, so that could have been at play with this coffee. Florality level 4. I think one of the other notes they have listed on here is jasmine, and again for me, like milk tea, and I think that's what was really emphasized with Hydrangea's version of this coffee that we've had in the past. That one was roasted with a Probat too. I think this might be the first time we've ever reviewed a Letty Bermudez that was roasted on something other than a Probat, interestingly enough, or even a drum roaster for that matter. That is still interesting though, level 4 nonetheless. Let's go ahead and move on. Caramel, level 4. very strong milk tea, sugary sweetness to this one. So that right there is definitely justified at that higher mark. And I think the original Letty Bermudez that we reviewed also scored very high in that sense. And I attributed that to being the Probat, but I just think it's this coffee in general that's so overly sugar, milk tea, sweet. And then level 3, that's the couple things. We got the spice and we got the savoriness. It's that slightly peppercorn spice quality that I have been mentioning quite a bit throughout this review, as they're not anywhere near as abundant as the peachiness of this coffee, but they're pronounced enough to the extent where it did seem to break through that, I want to say, monopoly on the very strong peachy qualities of this coffee. So yeah, they're prominent enough to kind of hinder the overall experience and results within this coffee. And then 2 more things worth discussing. We'll start with the body, level 2. Not necessarily the most amount of body to it, which I guess is kind of interesting. Given that it's brewed with the V60, it could be higher than that, Colombian coffee, but lighter bodied in general. It kind of gave that lighter milk tea experience to it. And then the final thing worth discussing is the cleanliness, level 3. I think on paper you would expect that this coffee would always have a level 3 given just how much processing there is to it, and it has a very strong artificial taste to it as well. But we've scored either Diego Bermudez's other Paraíso coffees that were similar to this or other Letty Bermudez coffees at that level 4 mark, because while there definitely is something that feels artificial about the way that the peach presents itself, it still is, we'll say, clean enough in the definition of the coffee, and it's not marred by other qualities to hinder that overall score for the cleanliness. This one, on the other hand, that spiced quality just does seem to take away from it overall, which made it very difficult to score it there at the level 4. Other than that, that very beautiful, we'll say, milk tea quality, boba sugar quality, the peachiness to it, they're all very defined, very pronounced, and very easy to detect within this coffee. In some cases, I would say so blatant and prominent that even people that don't drink coffee can probably take away these flavors from this one. So as I'm looking at this tasting wheel, I do think it's an interesting but good representation of what I was getting from this coffee. All right, so my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee. I will start with this first thing. I did give a sample of this coffee to Airworks, and I asked them to try it out to see if this is just something that we were experiencing or if this is actually the reality of this coffee. And I gave it to them a couple of weeks ago, and they never actually tried it, and they never gave us feedback by the time that we recorded this review. So that's really frustrating, because I'm very curious to see if it's something that we were experiencing or if it's the reality of this coffee. But I do tend to believe that it's just what this coffee was, given that it's very prominent within the aroma of the bag itself. Before recording this review, I went and took in the aroma of those whole beans one more time to see if it's still there, and it's still there. But what's been so interesting is all the feedback I've heard about this coffee hasn't insinuated that on anybody else's end. I've only heard really positive things about this coffee. It's vintage Letty, it's super peach forward, it offers such great sweetness and intensity to it, and nobody else has commented about experiencing the same results that we have. So for that reason, I'm just extremely curious to hear if anybody else has experienced this quality within this coffee. It's not uncommon. A lot of these more processed Colombian coffees, Wilton Benitez's coffees, who else am I missing? Just a lot of these coffees in general, some of Diego Bermudez's other coffees have this component to it. Edwin Norena, that's another example of it. And I think I'm missing one more producer. Regardless, it was prominent in this one for us, and I think that that hindered the overall experience. But at the end of the day, it was still Letty. It still offered a very interesting, intense, peach-forward experience that is very enjoyable. So kind of leads type of person I would suggest this coffee to. If you've enjoyed Letty Bermudez's coffees in the past, then I feel like this one's another really good representation of that. It's classic. It's a lot of what you're going to expect. Wonderful peach intensity to it, wonderful sugariness to it, that very interesting boba milk tea-like experience throughout the entirety of it. And it could have just been a one-off. It could have been our bag. I don't really know what happened in terms of that spiced quality, but I will say that it's there. So just keep that in mind. At least it was for us. So that's kind of the best direction I can point somebody towards on this one, and also the best way I can leave this review. If you by chance have had an opportunity to try this coffee, I'd definitely love to know your thoughts and impressions of it as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. This right here has been a review of the Letty Bermudez Thermal Shock Processed Colombia from September Coffee Co. Thank you for watching.